In these weeks of ordinary time, the Gospels call us to deepen our discipleship, our following of Jesus. And so today we have this image of eating the flesh of Jesus that we are given to, in some way, help us understand what it means to be disciples. And admittedly, it is a bit off-putting, as it was for the people who first heard it, to eat his flesh. But when we think about it for a moment, to eat his flesh means, in fact, that we are participating, joining ourselves, identifying with the death of Jesus. For in fact, to eat his flesh means that we recognize that he has died. And so when we align ourselves, join ourselves to living in such a way that sees that the death of Jesus is also something that we share in, we begin to understand what it means to be a disciple. The first thing we understand about the death of Jesus is those words that he said at the end, "Into your hands I commend my spirit." He was totally empty, and yet it was trust in God, his Father, to save him that allowed his death to have meaning. And so too with us. To be disciples of Jesus means developing that trust, not in ourselves and our own accomplishment, our own successes, but even in those moments, particularly when we find ourselves empty at our wits' end, that God does not abandon us. So discipleship is also then about having that deep trust in God, as Jesus did on the cross. But also to align ourselves with the death of Jesus and to join ourselves in sharing in his death also means that we understand our lives as he did, namely bringing about the salvation of the world. Those small acts in which we die to ourselves to help another person. I often think of how young parents learn so very quickly how to die to themselves, put themselves second, as their whole attention is on the children that they bring up, that they raise. Their whole life changes because they see that there is great happiness in dying to themselves, forgetting themselves, in order for life to be given to their children. And so being a disciple of Jesus is about having that mentality, that understanding, that vision of our lives as sacrificing ourselves for others. That's what it means to be a disciple. And finally, we see, as we hear in this gospel, that the death of Jesus is that pathway to life eternal, but not just life everlasting, but a life that shares in the very divinity of God. To have that deep faith that we are moving in this journey of our life to share life with God forever. And it means, of course, that we relativize and everything else in the world that we have today, rather than absolutizing it, those kinds of must-have things in order for us to feel as though we are successful. That's a great temptation in life, to absolutize material things in this world as that which gives our life meaning. No, it is about being a disciple with a deep faith in the resurrection of the life. A resurrection that doesn't mean just that we're going to live for all eternity, but that we're going to share in the very life of God that Jesus gives us as he dies. So today, as we hear these words, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, let's not be put off by that, but see it as an image in which our attention is arrested to see at life differently, to think differently about our life. It's a jarring image, but it's there to jar us out of our complacency about being a disciple of Jesus. It's not just about following some great hero, imitating someone that we admire, but rather discipleship is about participating and sharing in the very death of Jesus, a death that gives us a greater trust in the Lord whenever we find ourselves empty, when we find ourselves at our wits' end. It is a sharing in the death of Jesus that allows us to see that the small acts in which we die to ourselves and forget ourselves for others participates in the salvation of the world. And it is a discipleship that also has the promise, not only just of eternal life, but sharing in the very life of God. Let us today grow in discipleship, especially as we participate in the Eucharist. When we eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, when we participate in his death and we proclaim the death of the Lord in the Eucharist, reminding us that discipleship is about sharing in the very act of salvation in which Jesus gave his life for the redemption of the world. That surely is a discipleship worth pursuing.